Hello, my name is Philip Trobow, and I will be helping you with some tips and training for the Constitution Day lesson for the high school students. This is the Fourth Amendment lesson entitled Student Privacy Rights, Search and Seizure in the Schools. Let's first go through the documents that you should probably have in front of you. One is the original lesson plan. It is 3 pages long. Looks like this. There are 2 handouts. One is a text from the Fourth Amendment, and the other is a list of questions dealing with the Katz case. You should probably bring about 30 to 40 copies of each handout with you for each class that you plan on teaching. Finally, there's a Constitution Day lesson plan that's much more in-depth that you can either augment or supplement if you haven't watched this video. This will go into a very detailed step-by-step process. I will not be going through this per se, but this can be very helpful, and we did put a lot of time and effort into this, so please read this as well before you go into the classroom. Many of you have not may have not attended high school when there have been police officers as a daily presence. For most of our current students, police liaison staff and maybe even metal detectors are a normal part of everyday high school life. This means that student interaction with police is more than the typical population, perhaps more than what you're used to. And the students will ask you, I think, a variety of questions based on real-life experiences of themselves and of their friends. This lesson requires perhaps a little bit more preparation than the elementary school lesson. You may need to refamiliarize yourself, for example, with the Katz case, as well as some key Fourth Amendment concepts, including, I think, probable cause. This should not take very long. This should be fairly easy. And again, the students will be asking you questions very quickly, so you'll need to come up with quick answers. This is not a preparation for an oral argument on summary judgment. So when you come to class, introduce yourself to the class and explain what you'll be doing together. For example, my name is Philip Trobow, and I'm a lawyer. Today we're going to be exploring together your privacy rights in school and answer questions like, can the police search my car when it's not parked on school grounds, or can my locker be searched? We'll look into the power the police have and the laws that protect you. I want this to be helpful, so be thinking about questions you have about privacy and the law. That might be a good introduction. At this point, I would hand out the first handout, which is the text of the Fourth Amendment, to the students. Give them 1 or 2 minutes to read through it, and I suggest that you even read it out loud to the class. And then ask the class questions that the lesson plan suggests on page 2 of the original lesson plan, or some of your own questions if you'd like. You need to help them identify and understand what some of the key terms are. One good question to ask the class at this point might be, what's the purpose or value in having a warrant? Give the students a chance to think about this for maybe a minute or 2, and then be prepared to answer your own question if need be. Try to frame this part of the discussion as a balance between efficient crime control on one hand and due process on the other hand. That the Fourth Amendment tries to strike a balance between both, and that this is something that's always an issue when you're dealing with a search and seizure. You may wish to explain to them that a warrant is issued from a judge only upon presentation of probable cause, and that it takes time to get a warrant. And finally, you might need to point out that evidence that is gathered in violation of the Fourth Amendment can be thrown out of court, and that's known as the exclusionary rule. Now, the lesson suggests that you explain that there are exceptions to the warrant requirement and does not necessarily point out what any of those exceptions may be. You don't need to dust off your criminal procedure hornbook from law school. But I would point out 2 or 3 sort of typical, perhaps obvious, exceptions to the Fourth Amendment warrant requirement, those being perhaps hot pursuit, consent, plain view. And the best way to explain this is to perhaps think about a short scenario ahead of time for each exception to illustrate your point. For example, hot pursuit. The Fourth Amendment sounds very reasonable, but are there times when the value of having a warrant is less than the value of stopping crime? Let's imagine that the police have witnessed a robbery, and they've seen the robber, and the robber has rushed into a building to avoid capture by the police. Under those circumstances, should the police have to stop and get a warrant first before going into that building. That'd be a nice jumping off point for discussing that particular type of warrant exception. Earlier, I suggested that you refamiliarize yourself with the CATS decision. One quick way of doing that might be to simply look it up online at Wikipedia. You certainly are available to look at it online at Westlaw, pull off and read the whole decision if you want. But Wikipedia is a nice, quick way of refamiliarizing yourself with this famous case. And it's accurate insofar as what you're planning on doing in class. So again, if there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about the current status of the law or the CATS requirement, don't worry about it so much. You're teaching high school students about general broad concepts. You're not under the fire of a Court of Appeals panel. You can extend your discussion of the CATS case to the TLO case that the lesson plan mentions, and that's the case which extends Fourth Amendment protections to students in schools, much like the Tinker case extended First Amendment protections to students. So CATS plus TLO equals the need for a warrant generally before search and seizure. Now here's where it gets just a little bit tricky. The lesson is not particularly clear on the fact that Fourth Amendment protections mainly involve the police. School officials, like the principal or the vice principal, they're not normally held to the same high standard as the Fourth Amendment scrutiny of probable cause. They need only satisfy, in most circumstances, the lesser standard of reasonable suspicion. And again, those are terms that you might want to be familiar with before you walk into the classroom. The TLO case, in some of the language provided in the lesson plan, alludes to that, but it's a practical consideration that you'll need to know when answering the students' very specific questions. So for example, the principal can search a student's locker without probable cause. One underlying reason is that the school owns the locker. It's the school district's property, and so lockers can be searched fairly easily. Backpacks and purses fall under reasonable suspicion by school officials. Student cars parked on school grounds are a little bit like the locker situation. They can be searched by school officials. They don't need a warrant. But student cars parked off campus may not be searched by the school. They may, however, be searched by the police given the circumstances. What about pat-down searches or strip searches done by the school officials? You may get some questions about that. The closer one invades another person's body space, the heightened scrutiny, and the more likely that the school officials will need to have probable cause to so search. And that's what I mean about this being a little bit tricky. You'll likely be asked a number of search and seizure type questions, and in which it may be unclear at first who is doing the searching and the seizing. So it helps to understand the separate but the related roles that the police and the school officials have. And if you're a little bit confused, don't worry, there are plenty of police officers and school officials who can be a little bit confused, and they sometimes blur the lines, not necessarily knowing that. One way to avoid yourself getting into this particular avenue or line of questions is to simply limit your comments to what it is that the police can do. If you're having some issues with that, or if are short on time and haven't been able to look up some of these kind of essential terms. And getting back to the lesson plan, you'll want to use the plan's handouts and pass those out to the students ahead of time so that they can begin thinking about how to frame their questions and answers. And then once you have sort of some of the basic terms explained and the warrant procedure outlined, you should start getting a good discussion and a number of questions based on the real life circumstances. For the last 10 years, I've spoken to several hundred high school students at the annual legal expo that the bar associations put on. And we talk about a lot of these topics, and I think you'll be surprised at how articulate some of the questions can be, and then the student's ability to absorb some of these subtle concepts. I'm sure you'll do a good job. At the end of your class, make sure that you compliment the class and thank the teacher. I'm sure you'll do fine. Good luck. Thank you.